I wanted to record a video about this book, The Melodramatic Imagination by Peter Brooks, which is one of the books that's had the biggest influence on how I look at the world. It was a book that I read in a class in film school, actually, and it was on film theory related to melodrama. This class kind of slotted into some things that I had been thinking about and noticing for my entire childhood, like starting out with watching Disney movies, and all these Disney movies where there's the princess or the little lion cub, and all of these movies have some horrible villain who the hero has to defeat. And then, of course, there's true love at the end and everything works out. Even as a kid, I had this sense that, like, that's not how the world works. Mostly in the world, we're not having these epic battles between heroes who represent the goodness of the world and villains who represent all that is evil. In all those Disney movies that we watched as kids, there's one character who's the villain who comes in and disturbs the space of innocence. That's how Peter Brooks describes it in this book. So in Lion King, the space of innocence is, of course, the circle of life and the kingdom. Look out over this land, all of this will be yours one day, and everything is harmonious. And then, of course, Scar comes in, ruins everything, murders Mufasa, banishes Simba, and takes over, letting the hyenas rule, and everything is shrouded in darkness and chaos. And then eventually Simba comes back and defeats Scar, and then everything returns to harmony. So that's the basic melodramatic narrative. And Peter Brooks argues that this sort of melodramatic arc of the space of innocence and virtue being disturbed by the villain, and then basically this heroes versus villains, good guys versus bad guys paradigm, is not an eternal aspect of human nature. It's actually a very recent cultural phenomenon that all of the stories that we tell have this hero-villain dichotomy. Peter Brooks's theory is that melodrama was invented during the French Revolution, when this overarching sense of meaning in society that was generated by the Catholic Church and the monarchy was overthrown. And there was no longer a single shared paradigm, a single shared worldview or image of the world and how it functions and what our place is in it, and what especially the ethical imperatives or the moral laws of the universe are. What melodrama does is, in Peter Brooks's words, it elucidates the moral occult. It takes moral values and it pulls them out of that hidden realm underneath the surface of things, and it puts it on the surface, which is why melodrama has this connotation of being so, if you've heard the term, you probably think of like overacting or, over emoting. And melodrama does do that. The classical melodramatic plays during the French Revolution, they display the moral truths that underlie the fiction. Before the French Revolution, the drama in France and in Europe was primarily tragedies and comedies based on the classical Greek model. In tragedy, you don't generally have a hero and a villain. So think Oedipus. Oedipus is this admirable human being. He's a great king. He's wise. He's compassionate. If you read Oedipus Rex, the chorus and the people have nothing but nice things to say about him and how he's ruled the city of Thebes since he became king. But he has this one fatal flaw. He has a temper. The entire tragedy of Oedipus hinges on a single incident of road rage. Oedipus is walking down the road and comes across a guy with some servants. The servants ask Oedipus to step aside, but Oedipus doesn't want to, and the servants start hitting him with a horsewhip. Oedipus is not into this at all, and so he murders all of them. Now, it turns out that the dude who he murdered was his father, but he doesn't know that. He continues on his way to the city of Thebes, where the Sphinx is parked on the road and won't let anybody in or out of the city unless they answer her riddle. Nobody can answer it, so she eats them. Oedipus answers the riddle. The Sphinx kills herself. Greek mythology, right? and the city of Thebes is so grateful that they marry Oedipus to their recently widowed queen, who, you guessed it, is Oedipus's long-lost mother. So, of course, there's lots of stuff going on in this story. It's a literally incestuous clusterfuck of horribleness. But the key thing here is that what brings Oedipus down is not some villain who's plotting against him. Oedipus is defeated by his own flaws. That's very different from the melodramatic narrative. And I feel like that's actually a better representation of how the world works. I think tragedy is at least a needed antidote to the pervasiveness of the melodramatic paradigm. You know, if you look at how the news frames things, how Twitter arguments happen, there's always a villain. There's always a bad guy. There's always somebody that if we could just get rid of that person or that group, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, or whether it's immigrants, or whether it's Jews. The Nazis said, you know, if we get rid of all the Jews, then all our problems will go away. There's some person or group that if you could just get rid of them, then the pollution that's eating at the world will be eliminated and everything will return to its original state of happiness and bliss. Or maybe that state is in the future. There's some promised land, some promised utopia that we can get to. And this mythology runs deep. I think what's true is that we have a bunch of flawed human beings trying to figure shit out. You know, some of these human beings are great in other respects. Some of them, you know, maybe not so much. And that's where comedy comes in, which is the third major dramatic mode. Aristotle says that tragedy represents people as better than they are, and comedy represents them as worse than they are. So comedy is about how all of us fucked up individuals manage to work it out anyway and muddle through and live more or less happily ever after. Comedy generates conflict through misunderstanding. A classic example is Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors, where you have two sets of twins. Both were separated at birth. Both sets of twins, each twin has the same name even, and they don't know about each other, and they somehow, through some strange accident of fate, all end up in the same city on the same day. And you can imagine where it goes from there. It's just misunderstanding after misunderstanding after misunderstanding. But the nice thing about misunderstanding is that if you reveal the truth in the end, then everyone gets reconciled and everybody lives happily ever after. I feel like tragedy and comedy are both healthier ways to approach our world and politics than the melodramatic narrative is. I'm actually writing a book with a friend of mine that explores some of these ideas. The book is for storytellers. It's for writers. It's for people who write fiction or screenplays or whatever. And it's about, you know, how do we understand the ethical underpinnings of the stories that we tell, and how do we use the study of ethics to help us tell better stories, to help us tell stories that are compelling, that hook the audience, but also that might change the world. Because the other thing about melodrama is that it's fantastically successful at changing the world, but not always in the best ways. So that's what I will talk about in my next video, how melodrama can and has changed the world, but why you might not want to use it anyway.